lighthouse, undoubtedly the most fragile of monuments. Standing firm for centuries against the storming of wave and wind, it is finally abandoned by man and crumbles into legend. Such was the fate of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the oldest and perhaps the best-known lighthouse in the world. Travelers described it as being 100 times bigger than a man. Its light burned as brightly as a star in the night sky. Built in the 3rd century AD, it was destroyed by an earthquake in August 1303. All that now remains of this 7th wonder of the world are a few submerged columns off the coast of Pharos, the island that gave its name to the flame-carrying towers. Wine, Bordeaux wine, was the reason behind one of the oldest and most beautiful lighthouses still in operation, the Lighthouse of Corduron at the mouth of the Gironde. At that point, there is a treacherous rock which caused the ships of Henry III to founder with their cargo of wine. The king ordered his architect Louis de Foix to build an impressive building to serve as lighthouse, fortress, chapel, and royal residence. The tower was later extended by 20 meters, but the ground floor has retained its typical late 16th century architecture. The only neoclassical lighthouse on the French coast, with its porches, pediments, and pilasters, it was classified as a historic monument in 1862, one of the first buildings to be so honored, along with Notre Dame. In the 17th century, the lighthouse was still surrounded by houses and a farm where vines were grown. Over the years, the island disappeared and Corduron became a lighthouse on the open sea. The English were the first to think of building lighthouses on isolated rocks known to cause great damage to boats. The most famous of these reefs was Eddystone, a few miles out to sea from Plymouth. 5 different lighthouses were built on this rock in 100 years. An eccentric, John Winstanley, built the first tower, which was far too low. The second tower was higher, but it looked like a Chinese pagoda. The house was full of devices and incredible ornaments, but there was one problem: it wasn't solid. This didn't stop Winstanley from challenging the elements. While fishing, he used to call out, "Rise up, sea, come and put my work to the test." The sea didn't have to be challenged for long. On the 26th of November, 1703, both the lighthouse and its architect were swept away. The 3rd Eddystone lighthouse, built of wood, was destroyed by fire. An engineer, John Smeaton, took the idea for the design of the 4th lighthouse from the oak, a tree able to withstand the most violent of storms. The lighthouse was wide at the base, curving midway, and narrow at the top. The form was classical, but the lighting system was primitive. Another attempt at the impossible, Bell Rock. This time it was a matter of building a lighthouse on a reef that was covered by 3 to 4 meters of water at high tide. The engineer, Robert Stephenson, took up the challenge. The only way to work was at low tide. Between the tides, a manually operated pump dried out the site. A forge was hastily installed to sharpen implements blunted by the rock. The stones were cut and erected on the mainland. Special cranes devised by Stevenson set them down on the reef one by one in the order in which they would be assembled. The blocks were transported across cast iron gangways. Construction began in May 1807 and the tower was completed in September 1810. Once the builders were finished, the carpenters arrived to fit doors, staircases, window frames. Then provisions and barrels of water were hoisted into the lighthouse. The rigorous life of the guardians of the sea had begun. This is John Reed, the first keeper of the Bell Rock Lighthouse, and his last successor, John Both, who left the lighthouse when automation took over in 1987. Over 180 years, generations of men kept the light burning in this narrow tower in the middle of the ocean. Their accommodation consisted of 3 tiny rooms, the kitchen, the dormitory, and the watchroom. They were untiring in their supervision of the 9 parabolic reflectors, sending out the red and white flashes of light that have been seen along the coast of Scotland since February 1811. In 4 years, Robert Stevenson had built an unparalleled technological masterpiece. His exploit inspired the imagination and triggered an enthusiastic response. The lighthouse became a subject for literature, for engraving, for magic lantern shows. What could be more exciting, more romantic than this slender stone tower, guarded by men, shedding light to keep death at bay? However, on stormy nights, the light given out by the reflectors was not strong enough. The lighthouses were less effective than had been hoped. Then a young French physicist, Augustin Fresnel, came up with an idea that revolutionized lighting at sea. He imagined a system of graded lenses that would gather and concentrate the rays of light into a horizontal beam that would be much more effective than the system of parabolic reflectors. The first Fresnel lenses were based on straight rods. The central lens consisted of 4 polygons with trapezia forming the surrounding rings. At the time, it was far easier to cut straight rods than circular pieces.
You have to remember that France at that time specialized in the manufacture of Fresnel lenses and exported them all over the world. We had up to 5 manufacturers in France. Monsieur Barbier, the founder of the company, set up in business around 1850 to 1852, to be precise. They started prospecting the world market around that time. They had a succession of people who were all very dynamic, who were willing to go anywhere in the world. We supplied equipment to every corner of the world. One of our most important jobs was the beaconing of the Red Sea, managed by my father at the end of the last century. The work took 3 years. At the same time, we built a few lighthouses on land, including the one at Mocha, and of course the lighthouses on the islands. We really enjoyed the work. It was a noble and at the same time exciting thing to be doing.
The coast of Brittany, a far western corner of Europe where the sea is at its most treacherous, a belt of some 40 lighthouses, the most famous in France, are found here. At 75 meters, one of the highest towers in Europe, the Île Vierge lighthouse. The Lighthouse of La Vieille at the end of Raz Point, the last watchtower of the lost city of Is. Carillon, built in memory of a naval ensign who was guillotined under the Revolution at the age of 19, one of the most luxuriously decorated lighthouses. The rooms are 9 meters in diameter. The paneling is of Russian oak. Thévenik, the haunted lighthouse, bringer of bad luck. La Jument, funded by donation, stands on one of the most dangerous reefs in the Atlantic. During fierce storms, the sea lashes against the panes of the lantern. Armen, the most isolated, the most difficult, the most humid. It took 14 years to build the lighthouse in this hellish place, and then 17 years to reinforce it. Lastly, Le Créache on the island of Ouessant, an important landing lighthouse at the southern entrance to the channel, opposite its English counterpart, Bishop Rock. But what about other countries? Where are these steamers headed, setting off from the ports of Europe, packed to capacity? People began to travel on a grand scale towards the end of the last century. They traveled to find adventure, but also to avoid death. The failure of the potato crop, the ensuing famine, the industrial revolution that deprived people of work, just some of the causes of the mass exodus of immigrants to America. Through drama and tragedy, the lighthouse became a powerful image for these migrants. For those leaving their homes, that last light burning in the night symbolized the country they would never see again.
I was overwhelmed with sadness as I watched the light from the lighthouse. When I could no longer see it, I knew we had left forever.
Out on the open sea, life on board ship could be difficult. These crossings, indelibly engraved on the collective imagination of the United States, were made under appalling conditions. Charlie Chaplin found his way of transcending them. Promiscuity, poor hygiene, rotting provisions, the threat of epidemic, such was life at sea. When the distant glimmer of the first American lighthouse was sighted on the horizon after 5 or 6 weeks at sea, there was delirious rejoicing. What they saw was the light of hope, of welcome, of a new life.
the sight of the lighthouse, we threw ourselves on our knees and gave thanks to God.
Cape Race was the most important landing lighthouse in North America. Located to the south of Newfoundland, it was on the route of every European ship traveling to the United States and Canada. However, it was in this place, close to the reassuring lighthouse, that the danger was greatest. Here, death lay in waiting. Here, 1 ship in 8 disappeared without trace. Crushed by an iceberg, drawn by violent currents or misled by thick fogs masking the cliffs, the fate of the survivors was death from cold and hunger. The frequency of the shipwrecks, the high number of deaths, the petitions, the scandals, the mounting pressure eventually led to the building of the first lighthouses along the Canadian coast. At great cost and effort, the greatest danger spots were signaled: the capes, the small islands. Huge boilers were hoisted onto the beach to fuel the foghorns. But the new lighthouses gave scant light. In an effort to save money, the British government was using second-hand equipment, old oil lamps and parabolic reflectors that had been replaced in Europe by Fresnel lenses. Up to 1966, the Bonavista lighthouse in Newfoundland was still using a lighting system that had long been replaced in Scotland, the system originally used in the Bell Rock. However, there is no doubt that weather conditions here make signaling extremely difficult. We are flying over the Strait of Belle Isle between the coasts of Newfoundland and Labrador in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the shortest route between Britain and Montreal. A lighthouse was built with great difficulty on the summit of Belle Isle in 1856. As soon as it was in use, it was realized that it was too high. Its light was being dispersed in the thick fogs rising from the strait. A second lamp was installed lower down, beneath the foghorn. Further on, closer to Nova Scotia, ships pass a peaceful-looking island, Sable Island. But appearances can be deceptive. This island is the cemetery of the Atlantic. It's well documented that hundreds of ships were swallowed by these depths at a spot where the Gulf Stream meets the currents moving down from Labrador. 20 kilometers long and 1.5 kilometers wide, the island is inhabited by hundreds of wild horses, descendants of a pair of horses washed up from a shipwreck in the 18th century. The authorities were at first reluctant to put a lighthouse on this island, famous for its shipwrecks, but also for its shipwreckers. Would the light attract ships to the danger or turn them away from it? The question was fiercely debated. It was not until 1871 that 2 wooden lighthouses were built, one on either side of the island. The lighthouse on the western side of the island was particularly exposed to erosion by the elements, and it was rebuilt 7 times in the space of a century. Nowadays, the lighthouses are fully automated, the keeper's house sunk in the sand. Moving on from the island, the emigrants finally caught sight of the first American lighthouse. Built in 1716 by the British, it stands at the entrance to the port of Boston. As ships approached the Minnott's Ledge lighthouse, voices dropped to a whisper. This was the haunted lighthouse. It was rumored that the lamps and lenses were looked after by ghosts, the spirits of two keepers killed when the first tower collapsed. On windy days, if you listened closely, you could hear voices calling for help. However, this painful image did not last. Journey's end, so long awaited, was now in sight. The Statue of Liberty on Bedlow Island welcomed the newcomers to New York Harbor. Unveiled in 1886, this lighthouse, for such it is, was a monument to the glory of American independence. On top of the statue, designed by the Frenchman Bartholdi, 3 keepers took turns for 16 years to keep the flame burning in the torch, at once a symbol of liberty and a guide to passing ships. This is where the story of the lighthouse becomes the story of mankind. The Cape Race Lighthouse in Newfoundland. The Cap Chat Lighthouse in Quebec. The lighthouse on the River Kennebec in Maine, United States. The Carillon Lighthouse at Finistère. The Boston Lighthouse in the United States. The Point Amour Lighthouse in Labrador, Canada. The Longstone Lighthouse in England. The Créache Lighthouse in France. The rhythm of life of lighthouse keepers is a ritual, lighting lamps and putting them out. Actions repeated daily so that by night, lighthouses can light the coastlines of the world. The most difficult part of the job for a keeper of a lighthouse on the open sea is actually getting to his place of work. It takes a cool head, attention to detail, and very good pilots. Henri Le Gall, seen here in a film made in 1958, is an expert in these matters.
I never imagined myself doing this work. At the time, we had launches that were hollow at the back, and it was this that cost one of my fellow pilots his boat, which he lost at the Fore lighthouse. 2 people were drowned. The boat filled up with water, capsized, and shattered against the rock.
How long have you been captain of the Veleda?
33 years.
That's an awful lot of reliefs.
Yes, I never counted them.
Which lighthouse was the most difficult?
Armen. All the lighthouses are difficult, but Armen was the worst.
Were you ever afraid? Did you ever feel you wouldn't make it?
Afraid, no. It's not a question of fear. Worried, yes. Afraid, no. If you're afraid, you lose your cool. But you could say I've been worried. Sometimes we stayed alongside the lighthouse for an hour before going up. You had to judge the weather, the force of the water. And sometimes we had to turn back without getting off the boat. They always had enough reserve provisions on the lighthouse, enough for 3 months in principle. 3 months of stale bread and biscuits is a long time, I can tell you. But we often had to postpone the relief for several days.
The reliefs must have been a lot more dangerous at that time.
No. The reliefs have always been the same. There's always an element of danger.
Boarding is different for each lighthouse, but the rules for the relief are always the same. The fresh provisions are hoisted on first, then the keeper taking over the watch is lifted on. The keeper going off duty then goes down. The only lighthouses still using this ancient system of relief by ropes and winches are the French lighthouses on the open sea. Elsewhere, like here in Canada, the helicopter has replaced the old system. The Prince Shoal Lighthouse, a modern lighthouse built in 1955, stands at the point where the St. Lawrence and Saguenay rivers meet. Every week, the helicopter of the Canadian Coast Guards drops off one of the keepers starting duty and picks up one coming off duty. Also on a weekly basis, the Pole Star, a ship of the Scottish Lighthouse Service, brings provisions and relief teams to one of the most inaccessible lighthouses in the world, Bell Rock.
Bell Rock, Bell Rock, Bell Rock. This is Pole Star, Pole Star. Hey, let's sing it, over.
Southeast with 26 knots there just now. 26 knots.
If the conditions are good, the relief will go ahead, and with a small launch, and if there's any danger at all, they won't attempt to do the relief, and they'll try the next landing time, which is 8 hours later. If they can't do that, they'll do it by helicopter.
Landing conditions are so precarious that a helicopter is often needed to cross the few hundred meters between the ship and the lighthouse. A costly operation. One ship, a team of 30 men, a helicopter and pilot, all to get 2 keepers on and off the lighthouse. Lower down on the same coast of Britain, the Longstone Lighthouse watches over a chain of islands, the Farne Islands. For about a century, the families of keepers lived in this isolated lighthouse. Nowadays, keepers who look more like astronauts arrive by helicopter every 2 weeks. For 4 weeks, twice as long as for French lighthouses, 2 men share the watch, the upkeep of the buildings, the television, and the pleasures of fishing. It takes 2 to work a lighthouse, and the hardest part of all is maintaining good relations with the other keeper.
Un petit poulet breton.
On va se régaler, Jean.
Pignou, le petit casse-dalle pour 4 heures.
Je vais prendre le reste. Non, non, Jean, Kémen à Kémen. Tout le reste. Terminé.
On était une très bonne équipe, ce qui fait que
We had a very good team.
Ça marchait
We
bien.
all got on, and that's the most important thing.
Une mauvaise équipe, automatiquement, l'ambiance étant mauvaise, vous en garderez.
I was lucky to have some great mates, and my memories of that time are very happy ones. I'll never forget them.
Je pourrais dire impérissable.
You must make your own life in the lighthouse. You'll rarely find yourself working with someone you see eye to eye with on everything, but you get used to it. That's what life in the lighthouse is all about.
The keeper's skill lies in avoiding breakdown which could have disastrous consequences for a passing ship. Constant checks must be made on the generators and emergency lighting equipment, which should engage automatically in the event of failure. In these narrow confines, disorder and carelessness are not advisable. And on the polished wood floor of the Carillon Lighthouse, cloth pads are a must. The keeper on the watch takes meteorological readings twice daily.
Le parc de Carillon, bonjour à tous. Alors, pour ici, c'est vent du nord, force 1, mer belle et ciel clair, et pression 776. Bonsoir à tous. Crooked Lighthouse, Longstone.
With a third of their time spent on land and 2/3 on the sea, a lighthouse keeper who has been married for 15 years will only have spent 5 of those years with his wife. How do these men put up with such an irregular family life?
On 32 days home, they get sick of you. And then when you come back, it's just like sicking honeymoon.
I was almost 45, you know, before I had any kind of family life. Now at least I've got that. It's a plus point.
It's not an easy job in most ways. It's a lonesome job. We come here for 32 days at a time. I came in here today, now I'll be here for 32 days. And while we're here, we work an 8-hour shift and we're off for 16.
If I had to start again, I'd do the same thing over. I'd start all over again. Even though in my time, we had to spend 3 weeks in the lighthouse instead of 2. 20 days in the lighthouse and 10 days at home. Well, I suppose you could say we're sea people. We're interested in navigation. There's really no other answer. Maybe it's because we love to watch the ships going by. We take pride in keeping strict time with the watch.
C'est possiblement parce qu'on aime avoir les bateaux passer. Et puis on se fait un devoir d'être ponctuel à la surveillance.
The watch has always been central to the job of the lighthouse keeper. Even today, despite the sophisticated equipment, accidents still happen. The night we filmed the port of Portland in the United States, it was very foggy and a boat ran aground not far from where we were filming, just beneath the main lighthouse.
Over here on Cushing Island, I had my fog going on, and there was another fog going on, Ram Island Ledge Light, and he still went aground. So that means, I'd say we're still pretty useful.
Last night was one of the worst cases that I've done since I've been here South Bowling, due to the fog and the wind and the sea conditions. 5 people on board, very shook up. They was going on the rocks. We proceeded out to them last night, and all we could do, the most we could do is get the people off, the safety of the people, and anything else other to do was commercial salvage.
We filmed a salvage company trying to free the boat. They no sooner had it out than it capsized. The tug pulled it out to sea, where it immediately went down again.
In any case, it's not our job to... It's up to us to alert the maritime station at Conquet, or the police station at Brest or Cross Corsen. It's not up to us to intervene. Unfortunately, our job is to take note of damage.
Well, there's not really much you can do, especially this time of the year, because the cliffs are too covered with ice and snow and that, and we have no rescue equipment to get down to anybody, so you have to depend on aircraft or other boats in the area.
But I doubt very much if we could do anything really, only just watch probably 12 people drown.
To save or not to save, to intervene or to send for help. This is the dilemma facing present-day lighthouse keepers. In the past, with no radio or telephone, they had no choice but to risk their own lives. Such was the case of Grace Darling, the daughter of the keeper of Longstone Lighthouse, who became a national heroine. The keepers still like to tell her story.
This is Grace Darling's room. This is her bedroom. This is where she slept. Her bed was just here, under the window here. She woke up one morning and saw the wreck of the Forfarshire, which was on this near rock here, the Harker Rocks. She went downstairs, told her father. He said it was too stormy to go out. It was too rough for the boats to get out from the shore. She persuaded him to make an attempt, and they set off in their own boat, rowed around to the sheltered side of the rock, and brought survivors back.
Of the 52 people on board, 9 were saved. The survivors stayed in the lighthouse for 2 days until the storm had died down. Then a rescue boat came and took them ashore. Grace Darling became famous overnight. Her story was written, her portrait painted. People flocked to see her. and her picture was used to sell chocolates and sweets. Like all true heroines, Grace Darling died young. Because of all the fuss, her father claimed. In fact, she died of tuberculosis. On her grave, a monument was built that can be seen from the sea, an oar next to her face symbolizing her courage. Grace Darling helped her father. The lighthouse watch was often a family affair. The father trained his sons, who were in turn helped by their own children. The number of buildings grew with the generations. The most surprising example of this is undoubtedly the Cape Spear Lighthouse in Newfoundland, where the Cantwells have been in charge for 6 generations.
This is my great-great-grandfather right here. This is my grandfather. And this is my father. We've been 4 greats back, and I'm the 6th generation who's worked here at Cape Spear. Life, as I remember, was very good. We had lots of heat and lots of light and lots of food, which was the essentials and the basics of life. If you had that, well, you had everything basically that you needed. We had a good home life and a nice sturdy house. It was a little awkward at times, stuck up on top of a rock. But other than that, it was a lot of fun. We were all youngsters at the time, from 10 down. We would spend our time trying to get behind the corner on our father and get over the fence and see how close to the cliff we could really get without getting caught or without falling. Of course, we would get caught once, and you would pay the price, of course, and you wouldn't do it anymore.
The authorities gradually began to rationalize the job and the way of life of the lighthouse keepers.
Well, we were told that back in '71 when they started talking about automation, that eventually they would phase out. Each, the families would go. So the first one went, and then about 2 or 3 years, the second one, and about the same span of time, the other one went. It was 2, and I was the only one was left. And after that, it wasn't as good at all, because I come down like 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. And when you come down in the morning and find nobody here, it's quite different from what it was years ago.
First, the families left, and then the jobs of the lighthouse keepers were threatened.
Personally, myself, this is my last trip out to the Bell Rock, and they're sending the engineers to put in an automated light, and it will do away with the services of light keepers.
Clearly, men cost too much. At the Maritime Centre in Halifax, in Canada, the future lies with computers.
One of the biggest drawbacks with regard to computerization is the cost of maintaining a lighthouse station. 80% of the costs are directly linked to maintenance and personnel. Only 20% goes on the equipment itself.
How many lighthouses will still be kept by men in 1991?
By 1991, there will be 2 left. St. Paul and Chibukto Head near Halifax. This table shows the situation in 1982. There were 32 staffed stations. If you'll permit, I'll give you the rundown on what happened in the next few years. Bacaro closed in '85. Battery Point in 1987. Cape Roseway in 1985. Country Island, '86. Cranberry Island in 1986. And Cross Island in 1988.
East Island Band va être fermé en 1991. Flint Island a été fermé en 1985. Fort Suez a été fermé en 1986.
In the deserted lighthouse, everything runs automatically. Buildings that are still functional have been abandoned, prey to ransackers.
I don't know if next time I have 3 or 4 trips, he said. There's only take 3 people.
And yet there are still lighthouses where families keep the watch together.
It's like this.
That's to talk to the pilot. But I don't know who would ever want to talk to him.
In a reversal of tradition, now it's not the keeper that the helicopter brings to the lighthouse, but his wife and children. For 3 months, they will live at the pace of the isolated lighthouse. Between Newfoundland and Labrador, a particularly dangerous strait leads into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The 2 lighthouses of Belle Isle stand like sentinels on the volcanic islet. These 2 will be the last to be inhabited by men.
Right now we're engaged, as you can see here, at Northeast Belle Isle Light Station in movement of the lightkeepers family and resupply, groceries and personal effects. The keepers themselves came out to the isolated stations here. They came out sometime in early May, and their families, because the kids would be in school, had to wait until sometime mid-June when school was out. And this is the first chance now the helicopter's been able to come up in this area to take them out.
And so, for a few years more, in this age of satellites and automation, the guardians of the night continue to keep the watch.
Green Island était fermé en 1986. Gull Rock va être fermé en 1988. Green Island était fermé en 1985. Hart Sound va être fermé en 1985. Liscombe a été fermé en 1986. Louisbourg va être fermé en 1991. Low Point va être fermé en 1990. Majors Beach a été fermé en 1983. Medway a été fermé en 1986.
What is it about lighthouses?
It's all about people caring for people. It's about light in the darkness.
Poems have been written about them, books, stories, all kinds of things, paintings and posters and everything you can think of.
Lighthouses to me is whenever that light shines, it's a spiritual light.
Hi, I'm Jack Perkins. As far as we know, the first lighthouse built anywhere in the world was outside Alexandria, Egypt in the year 280 BC. It was an amazing structure for the time. 400 feet tall with a wood fire burning atop it. It was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It would be more than 2,000 years before, in a brand new nation, the United States, a brand new president, George Washington, from his capital in New York, would commission the first lighthouse to be built right here. Portland Headlight in Maine. With this structure began the story of lighthouses in Maine. And for 2 centuries, what a story it has been.
I don't get any money from the government or anything for the 28 years that I put in the service. I don't. But I did my part, and I'm glad I did.
Connie Small was 96 when we spoke with her. She was 20 back when her fiancé asked her, did she want to be a lighthouse keeper's wife? She did. His first assignment, though, was the Lubec Channel Light, which was a stag station. No families allowed, except for occasional visits, which were merry and sometimes unofficially lasted overnight. Elson Small's next assignment did permit families. That was Avery Rock.
But it was one of the most desolate, one of the roughest places that you have on the coast. And we spent 4 years there.
From that point on, for more than a quarter century at 5 different stations, Connie Small lived the solitary, demanding, contemplative, arduous life of a keeper up and down the Maine coast. At first, Maine's lighthouses were constructed not alone for the obvious reason, to safeguard shipping, protect lives. It was not solely humanitarian. Just as much, it was commercial. Lighthouses were planned, financed, and erected for the sake of business. America lived on the coast. It relied on the sea, and ships were most likely to travel along coasts and to ports where cautioning, welcoming sentinels stood. Lighthouses, in other words, were good for business.
Everything moved by water, you know. Back in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, everything moved by water. Always had, up until the 50s when we got the interstate highway system and then started building cargo jets. But before then, it was lighthouses.
These are ageless, powerful, potent places that bespeak of centuries of our maritime heritage here in Maine.
Some lights were built to warn. Here lies danger. Sail clear of shoals and shore. Some were built to welcome. Refuge, safe harbor, await. Some were meant simply to direct. Bound for Bangor, as so many ships were when Bangor was America's lumber capital. Leave behind the great light at Matinicus, 25 miles out to sea, and let the light spirits of the Penobscot guide you in. If there were and are more lighthouses along the coast of Maine than most anywhere, between 60 and 80, depending on when you count it, it's because there are also here more islands and ledges of which mariners need be cautioned. Challenging tides ranging up to 30 feet. Sudden, thickly enveloping fog. And some frightfully fierce storms. With all those, Maine has needed all these. On what used to be Portland's breakwater, this is called Bug Light. Not a name with the dignity its builders must have had in mind. Built in 1855, rebuilt 20 years later, it was meant, for some reason, to resemble a 4th century Greek monument. replete with Corinthian columns. Today it remains unused and unusually distinctive. Over the years, lighthouses have come in many shapes and sizes, and Kirk Money is rather a student of that.
We begin by looking at towers. The earliest tower in Maine is the tower at Portland Headlight that was constructed between 1787 and 1790. That tower is a rubble stone structure with a conical shape. The conical shaped towers would continue in use in Maine up through the 1830s and 40s. With the establishment of the U.S. Lighthouse Board in 1852, professionally trained engineers, graduates of West Point Academy, were placed in charge of the design and construction of light stations in Maine. During the second half of the 19th century, the lighthouse engineers were responsible for introducing a number of innovative designs to light towers in Maine. Among these are round brick towers, tapered square towers, cast iron towers, caisson, or the so-called spark plug towers. As well as the octagonal shingled towers along the lower Kennebec River, all constructed in 1897.
The height of the light is what's always been crucial. First, to raise the light itself to safety above raging storms. Second, to allow the light to be seen from far enough away. A light 50 feet up can be seen for 8.5 miles. 100 feet, almost 12 miles. The tallest lighthouse in Maine is on Boone Island, 6 miles offshore. Not much of an island. Mainland fishermen used to come out and leave packages of food and clothing on the rocky ledge for any mariners who might be marooned here. Those packages, or boons, gave the ledge its name. The first lighthouse in 1800 was washed away, so another one was built, and it washed away, and another one, until finally the current tower went up in 1855. Its light, 137 feet up, can be seen for 19 miles along Maine's westerly coast. Over the years, there have been many fuels for lighthouses: wood fire, tallow candles, whale oil, kerosene, electricity, today solar electricity. But whatever the fuel, it was always the keeper's preemptive responsibility to light that light.
You have a little brass can, a beautiful little brass can that you fill with denatured alcohol. You put fill a little container, and you put it under the mantle. And that heated the mantle, and when that mantle got white hot, you turned it on, and then it would vaporize and you have your light.
Fuel creates the light, but it is the lens that focuses and amplifies it. And the most ingenious lens was designed by a Frenchman, Augustin Fresnel. It is a jewel of refraction and reflection. Large Fresnel lenses today are worth millions of dollars. Visit the Shore Village Museum in Rockland.
We actually call ourselves not only the Shore Village Museum, we're Maine's Lighthouse Museum. And we have the largest collection of lighthouse lenses on display any place in the United States. We have every order of lighthouse lens except the first order. Now, order is simply size. Our biggest one is a second order from the Petit Manan Lighthouse. It's about 80 miles east of Rockland. Our ceiling in the front room is about 10 feet, and it just fits in there. And it's a beauty. We have the Matinicus rock lens, which is a third order. And this is in complete operating, it really operates. And then the fourth orders, we have one from the Cuckles. We have several fifth orders. We have the fifth order from Dublin Point, that's down in Kennebec. We have the Idaho lens, which came from Lighthouse Robinson Point, also is called. Our other prize, and I think I have to call it that, is our sixth order. And this is only about 20 inches high. And one thing I want to say about the lenses are the jewels, the gems of a lighthouse.
On Seguin Island off Bath is Maine's only first-order light. Largest lens, and since the island is high, Seguin becomes the highest light. It's distinctive for other reasons. After Portland Head, it was the second light station built in Maine. And because there's often heavy fog around, Seguin has one of the most powerful fog horns ever contrived. When it sounds, it's been known to knock seagulls out of the air from the concussion. Connie Small served on Seguin. It was a key light, meaning when it was turned on in the evening, all the other lights seeing it would start coming on.
It was quite a sight to see it, too, because here they'd come, sometimes just one right after another. And I used to love to go up in the tower and watch them and say hello, hello to little friends all along the coast.
Lest we suggest that the keeper's life was soft, hear these stories of Marcus Hanna, who, while tending two lights at Cape Elizabeth during a heavy storm, rescued the crew of a schooner being smashed to pieces on the rocks below. Of Abby Burgess, whose father was keeper at Matinicus Rock, but in 1859, when a ferocious January storm whipped up, the keeper had gone to the mainland and couldn't get back. His wife was sick, so it was up to the daughter, young Abby, to care for the family and to keep that light burning by herself for a month. Connie Small tells a story from Avery Rock of a 5-day blizzard, her husband desperately ill, in a coma.
Well, here I am. I was only 21 years old, alone, nobody at all that I could talk to or call because we had no communication. I kept putting water on his lips and doing what I could do, and I had to go up and keep the lighter going. I had to keep the bell going because that blizzard lasted for 4 or 5 days. So finally, the 5th morning, I went in and I looked at him and I did what I thought was right to check him. And there was absolutely no response. And I know, as sure as I'm sitting here, that that man was dead. So I went up, started to go up to put the light out, and I got as far as the door, and I put my head on the door sill, and I said, I've done everything I know how. You'll have to help me, Lord. I went up and put the light out, and I came back. I went in, and I looked down, and he opened his eyes very feebly, and he says, I'm hungry. Well, I said, what do you want to eat?
There's a tale of a shipwreck long ago at Hendrick's Head, a place now owned by a wealthy sporting wear manufacturer and lighthouse fancier, Ben Russell.
The keeper was unable to do anything because of the ferocity of this storm, but he did pull in a bundle. And it turned out to be a bundle of feather mattresses, but he heard a noise inside, so he opened it up, found a sea chest, and inside was a crying baby girl with a note that's from the captain and his wife saying that they were committing the child into God's hands. So they rushed it into the lighthouse here at Hendrick's Head, the keeper's house, and brought the child back to health. And having lost their child recently, they adopted it to be their very own and named this child Seaborn.
Even when there were no babies washing ashore here at Hendrick's Head, no one dying and coming back to life, it wasn't easy to be a keeper. Jeff Burke keeps a keeper's house today.
Well, I can tell you that taking care of these buildings is a heck of a lot of work. The paint doesn't stay on the side of a building, the weather side, for more than a year or two. I mean, you got to start all over again. And they didn't have the benefit of modern paints and materials and things like that. And it was hard work. Of course, his primary duty was to the light tower and the fog bell, to keep them totally in excellent shape. But besides that, they had to worry about supplies, getting the kids to school, taking care of all the buildings, filling out reports. You know, always on the lookout for the inspector who came unannounced with his white gloves on to make sure that there wasn't a speck of soot in the lantern room. Keeper's room upstairs faces the tower, and you could tell from the light coming through the window whether or not the thing was burning properly or not. And if it wasn't, he'd get up in the middle of the night and go and adjust it.
Well, if keeping a lighthouse was a lot of work, and could be perilous. What was the appeal? What is the appeal yet today?
It's hard for people to understand, I think, the love that people have for lighthouses.
Fillmore Wass lived at Libby Island for over 20 years, wrote a book about it.
And that it probably wasn't as rough a life as they thought.
There is a mystique about lighthouses, and I'm not sure what it is. Everyone seems to be fascinated.
We have people that come from all over town in the morning or in the evening just to see the light, just to kind of connect with it, so that some constancy in their lives. It's a sense of place.
And lighthouses represent a simpler time, a simpler way of life, something that people can relate to and something that they want to go back to.
Tim Harrison runs the Lighthouse Depot in Wells, Maine, where one can purchase just about anything related to or in any way reminiscent of lighthouses, satisfying that inexplicable but powerful lure of the light.
The public has just gone wild about lighthouses.
Maybe the question, what is the appeal of lighthouses, is best answered just by looking at them. If it cannot be defined, it certainly cannot be denied.
Lighthouses are built in the most spectacular locations on the coast, on points basically, on high land. They're beautiful. They look like statues, like great works of art.
Jeff Burke lives by one of those works of art, having, with his wife Judy, transformed the keeper's house at Robinson Point on Isle Ho into an inn, accessible only by boat, gas lights, just a dozen or so guests, and Judy's delicious cuisine.
It's something that I think just appeals to some people, and when it seems like when they get here, it's even more special than what they thought. I think it's the remoteness. It's the idea of no telephone. People that just want to sort of take a little respite from life or something. And people really do find their selves here.
That's what they've always been for, lighthouses, to help people find themselves. What now for Maine's lighthouses? They've all been automated, no more keepers. With GPS, Haran, all the electronics of modern boats, there's not the same navigational need for them. So other uses are found. Maine's light stations still serve, in many ways.
Historically, Petit Manan Island and some of the other lighthouse islands were seabird nesting islands. But back around the turn of the century, many of these seabirds were killed for their feathers to feed the millinery trade. After this was outlawed, the seabirds started to make a comeback, and many of them gravitated to the lighthouse islands because these islands were manned by lighthouse keepers and their families. And they removed or shot the gulls, great blackback gulls and herring gulls, which prey on seabirds. They shot them because they fouled the buildings and the water supply. So by removing the gulls, that allowed the seabirds to start coming back, the populations to increase. Today, Petit Manan Island is a premier seabird nesting island that has common terns, Arctic terns, roseate terns, puffins, guillemots, and eider ducks.
Other uses to which lighthouse islands today are being put, besides inn and refuge: Mount Desert Rock, 25 miles off to sea, today home to teams of whale researchers from Bar Harbor's College of the Atlantic, doing the most comprehensive cataloging of migrating whales ever attempted. Bear Island, off Northeast Harbor, leased as a summer home to a private citizen on the condition he spend thousands of dollars to restore and maintain it. Seguin, each year more than 100 people answer an ad hoping to win the right to live here all summer. For a couple from Colorado, what an idyllic vacation.
We decided we were not going to spend another summer in a coat and tie in the office, so we moved to this nice tranquil island with a population of 2.
The differences are vast. We don't have pollution. We're surrounded by water. There's no traffic, no lines to stand in. The visitors are wonderful. We've thoroughly enjoyed them. They're here because they want to be.
Some people love lighthouses so much they build their own, like this one on the coast at Bernard, which Irving Silverman uses in a way that, as far as we know, no other lighthouse, real or fantasy, is used.
The treasured ones who stood amid God's splendor ever knew.
Lord of the world, the King supreme, ere aught was formed, he reigned alone.
Each week, it is a temple. Its light, holy.
Made known.
Crown of all time, the one who reigned before all mortal shape was made.
Two more lighthouses serving distinctive purposes lie in the course of the Fox Island thoroughfare. At one end is Brown's Head. And what is it used for? Well, as a perk for the local town manager.
In 1993, I became town manager of the town of Vinyl Haven, and part of my job is to live here at Brown's Head and to be the current keeper of the light. Living in a lighthouse is a unique and wonderful experience.
In the center of the thoroughfare, the light at Goose Rocks serves both traditional purposes, to guide and to be appreciated. Then, on the other side of Vinyl Haven, is the light at Haran Neck. A few years ago, the Coast Guard was about to tear it down. The Island Institute campaigned to save it, eventually won the right to buy it and begin to restore it. And that gave people at the Island Institute a very good idea. So that by now, what this light has done is inspire the way of the future. The way of the future is the Maine Lights program. Congress was urged by the Island Institute to pass legislation establishing this program, by which the federal government will continue to maintain these lights and their fog signals, while relinquishing control of the rest of the properties surrounding the great lighthouses. Those properties will pass, as appropriate, to various civic and non-profit organizations which will ensure their survival. The Maine Lights program is unprecedented.
Today, we can take heart that this legacy is going to continue. Maine is leading the nation, and I think the world, really, in saving lighthouses.
President George Bush spoke at the luncheon paying tribute to the Maine Lights program.
By helping to keep these very special lighthouses burning brightly into the next century, you're showing better with actions than I possibly can with words what it means to be one of 1,000 points of light. The torch is being passed from those who, for more than 2 centuries, have served and endured along the rugged Maine seashore in service to others. People like Connie Small and her late husband, Elson. We salute you.
Connie Small and the others did what they did in lighthouses over the years because it was right. Not easy, rarely easy, but right. Maybe celebrating lighthouses, we are celebrating not just heroism and courage, steadfastness and endurance, but the simple idea of doing right. Maybe in this different and less simple time, we hope that we too, somehow, might be suffused with that light spirit.
Whenever that light shines, it's a spiritual emblem or a spiritual light